Welcome everybody joining us today. My name is Olga Skrypnyk, working at the Ukraine Media Center at Ukrinform. This morning has not been very good. We were shelled by the Russian aggressor, and due to the efforts of our defenders and thanks to them, we are able to hold today's event. It is a pleasure to talk to the panelists this morning. We'll be talking about Crimea and about the war crimes and the breaches of international human rights in 2023. We'll be listening to the representatives of the Crimean Human Rights Groups who have come up with a report on the war crimes and the human rights violations in 2023 in 2023. We will also be talking about the internationally accepted rules. Today's panelists are Olga Skrypnyk, the head of the Crimean Human Rights Group, Iryna Sedova, a researcher at the CHRG, Volodymyr Chekrygin, the deputy board of the Crimean Human Rights Group, Bohdan Melnykovych serves as a lawyer at the Crimean Human Rights Group. I would like to begin with Ms. Skrypnyk. Let us begin with the political pressure that the Russian aggressor has been advocating and the militarization of the peninsula. Welcome, everybody. Of course, we are thankful to the defenders of Ukraine. This morning, the air defense has been very successful because we feel we are defended. We feel that you are securing our skies. And we thank the Ukraine Media Center, the people who have been paying so much attention to the Crimean issue. Unfortunately, Crimea has become one of the major air bases where the flights are taking off to attack Ukraine. Beginning with 2014, we have been documenting crimes against humanity, human rights violations committed since 2014, beginning with the abduction of people and politically motivated cases. Unfortunately, over this time, the Russian Federation has only increased and cemented this system of oppression. Beginning with the full-scale invasion, Crimea has become a center for detainment of people abducted from the occupied territories. That's why our focus has been widened, including the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. Many civilians abducted from from Ukraine have been transferred to Crimean Peninsula. Our monitoring says that the number of such people increases. In 2024, Russia officially used only 2 temporary containment facilities in Crimea for political prisoners. They opened another pre-trial detention center and another, including number 8. We have identified the head of those illegal centers. Number 2 is headed by Mr. Khartoum, and number 8 is headed by another person. We should not only be talking about the victims, but those responsible for such war crimes. These pre-trial detention centers hold different categories of people. The number of those is increasing. The issue is that many of them are held incommunicado, which is to say that they cannot inform where they are and how they are being held. Lawyers are not allowed to visit them. We know much about the detention centers 2 or 8, but the authorities would decline to inform what kind of and how many people are held there. We don't know whether they are still held there or they have been transferred to the Russian Federation. We also know the situations where people were taken and transferred to the occupied Donbas territory, or they returned them to the southern territories, as was the case when the new chamber of torture in Chingar, a newly set up pre-trial detention center. We are gathering those materials. We know that this is a major torture chamber where people were held, including this Changar place. And of course, there is no way of legal protection of these people. As for the civilians, Russia is continuing to pass sentences. 2023 was no exception. There were a number of such illegal sentences. As for the abducted persons from Zaporizhia and other regions, they are charged with spying or participation in the Crimean battalion. This has been totally fabricated cases. In the cases that we were gathering information, we know that they were tortured. In particular, a journalist, Sergei Tsegipa, was sentenced. Alexander Zarivny, the head of the humanitarian politics of the local administration, which is to say utterly civilian people who were not connected to the military services. At the end of 2023, we passed information to the United Nations bodies about 53 persons who were abducted and transferred to Crimea, but it should be noted that this is only part of the information. We know for sure about 53 persons. In fact, there are more of them. Russia, more often than not, after some period, has been transferring them to the Russian Federation. Persecution is taking place in targeting the Crimean population. The Ukrainians, the Crimean Tatars are facing persecution. According to our data, at least 193 persons are people who have been detained on political motivated cases. They're held either in Crimea or in the territory of the Russian Federation. When and if it's in Russia, it's in the colony, or otherwise their cases are being investigated. The rest of those who are staying in Crimea, they are held in the temporary containment cells. As for the specifics of these persecutions, one of the most conditionally saying, we call it a case against Crimean Muslims or a case against Crimean Tatars, where they are accused of being participants of Hizbut Tahrir, where the authorities cannot prove their allegations. As you see on the screen, at least 99 people, almost all of them are Crimean Tatars, are being behind the bars, and over 2023, at least 17 sentences have been passed. The sentences range from 4 to 20 years of imprisonment. As far as we know, 20 years of imprisonment is the highest sentence, and they all have to do with Crimean Tatars. Mr. Asmara is one who was sentenced to 20 years behind the bars. All these sentences mean that these people will be held at the maximum security regime penal colonies in the anti-sanitarian conditions, in the terribly cold weather. And literally, people are dying there, because 2023, unfortunately, was the first year when we saw the death of political prisoners. Mr. Shafaro and other person did not receive a relevant medical care. The occupiers knew the state of their health, but because of the failure to provide medical care, led to their deaths, one in the colony, one in the pre-trial detention center. Other people like Ahmed Suleimanov, who needs to be his heart needs to be operated, and he is not medically cared for. He cannot be held in prison, and they know that, but they continue that crime that can lead not only to the detriment to his health, but to the death of the Ukrainian citizens. If there is a good news, there is a piece of good news. We have two persons coming back to the territory of Ukraine. Andriy Zakte, accused of the so-called saboteurs, and Mykola Shukhtar was accused of political crimes because he was participating in the rally commemorating the Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko. Both have served their terms. Only after that they were released. They were held for some time at the Center for Foreign Citizens, which is to say they served another term, and after that they were released. Another persecuted group of people are the so-called Ukrainian spies and the saboteurs. The sentences are different. We have put them together into the group where there are 25 people who lived in the Crimean Peninsula. At least 10 of them were abducted from the southern territories of Ukraine. The charges are similar. People are being tortured. They are forced into witness against themselves. They're forced to make video statements, and after that they would be sent to the maximum security regime penal colonies after the sentences have been passed. Another group are those who are charged with the participation in the Crimean battalion. Most of them are the Crimean Tatars, and the Ukrainians are not the exclusion. The situation has spread over to the southern part of Ukraine because the list of 31 persons include abducted persons, at least 12 of them coming from the southern territory, including the Kherson Oblast, where they were abducted. The cases of Tereshchenko, Khalilov, Khartumetov, they were sentenced and they were transferred to the territory of Russia. Another type of prosecution is a purely religious intimidation. People are persecuted for their religion. The Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, they were recognized as a terrorist organization. They are criminally prosecuted. All they did wrong was to hold their religion, and they don't have anything to do with the Ukrainian protests. They adhere to their religion, which doesn't threaten anybody. But 11 of those have been imprisoned only because of their religion. The judgment and the verdict would range from 6 to 11 years. At least 4 people have been sentenced for such religious beliefs. Part of them are serving their sentence in the occupied Crimea. This is what has to do with the main groups. Journalists are also persecuted. Ms. Sedova will be talking about that in particular, but let me underscore here that none of the Crimean political prisoners were released. We believe that we should set up a powerful coalition of states around one of the points of Zelensky peace platform, which is to say that Ukrainian civilians must be returned to Ukraine. Literally, these people are dying in the places of non-freedom, especially people who have been abducted since 2024. They have no possibility to inform about their stay or their condition. Ms. Sedova, could we talk about the persecution of journalists, people who are serving pro bono as journalists, and those who are courageous enough to speak against the Russian occupation in the occupied Crimea? The freedom of expression is being persecuted in Crimea. These persecutions are harsher and harsher. We know about 16 Crimean journalists and activists who are now behind the bars. The sentences against them have been totally made up. The authorities wanted them to acknowledge the crime that they did not commit, One of those is Ms. Dominovich. She was captured, and due to the psychological pressure and torture, she was forced to sign on the dotted line on the blank sheet of paper. She was held in terrific circumstances and conditions. She lost the ability to hear, and she has been seeing a lot of torture and unfair trial. Ms. Yesipenko, Gilalov have both been tortured. They were psychologically tortured in order for them to say that and accept that they were actively acting and were very much open about their position against the Russian occupation. The other thing is that people are trying to publicly and openly say their word in the social media. There is a point of 20.3 in the Russian administrative code. The number of people persecuted on these grounds have been growing. People are against this war, and they're trying to write about that in the social media and talk about that in the streets. We've seen 357 cases of administrative code, different fines from 10 to 50,000 rubles, just for the case that people wrote something on the social media. These cases are absurd. We have recorded that they have been charged with discrediting the Russian army, and it'll be enough to post a Ukrainian flag to be charged with that. And hashtag no to war will lead to an enormous fine. When people in the street talk with their acquaintances or friends, something to the effect that Russia has begun this war is unjust, we are for peace. And if people are reported about those facts, then the cases are being opened and people are fined. A girl who posted on the Instagram the avatar with the heart and the Ukrainian flag was fined for discrediting the Russian army. The words "Glory to Ukraine," "Glory to Heroes," this song, the Red Viburnum, is considered to be something against the Russian law. You can't mention that in the train, for example. A man, for example, on the train said that we don't need this war. He was fined for 40,000 rubles. That is to say, this is an absurd situation. But there are special forces who are reporting on the Crimeans. Mr. Salivov had set up his own Telegram channel, and it has a number of followers. They are regularly monitoring social media to know what people are trying to write on the social media. If there is something they don't like, they repost this on the channel, the Crimean Smerch, which is a kind of reporting on the people. They tell officials that they are civil activists, but we think that this is an arm of the FSB that has been masquerading as a social media group, and they make people to come up with the public statements that they are sorry for what they had written. For example, "Glory to Ukraine." For those who would not say that they are sorry, who don't want to come up with a public excuse, another person was intimidated, and he was visited by the FSB officers and demanded that he should make a public record. He said he wouldn't excuse and offer any apology. At the end of the day, he has been put behind the bars. On other channel, they write that this information has been taken from this Telegram channel, Smirsky Smerch. These are appalling cases. and there is a parallel persecution for specific actions. For example, two persons, Mr. Zhitkov and Savchenko, they put up an anti-war graffiti. One of those was taken under the house arrest. But people are trying to voice their position. They're putting up some pictures. They're trying to put their voices on the social media. They're waiting for Ukrainian authorities to deoccupy the territory. These are brave people of Crimea, in spite of the fact that they have been sentenced by the authorities. They are still, in spite of all those punishments, they are trying to put up some resistance to the occupying force. Mr. Melnykovych, can I come to you and we'll talk about the legislation regarding the Crimean thing? During the second year of the full-scale aggression, the legislation has been targeting these issues. Of course, a number of institutions have been set up over the last decade. Last year, we saw a dramatic change of situation because we saw a lot of refugees, both internally and externally displaced persons. There have been a number of amendments to the Ukrainian legislation. The government has passed a number of decrees on simplifying the procedures for people to receive different kinds of aids. For example, families with children are now served through the DIA platform. You can apply to receive aid, for example, on the matters of adoption of children or those children that have been adopted or single parents. For the period of the martial law, even abroad, you can be helped in terms of finances once you have given birth to a child. You can also apply for the resumption of receiving your pension while you are staying abroad. Another important change is that in December, the president signed a law that has been submitted to the parliament on the recognition of the educational documents of the people who were educated in the temporarily occupied territories. That law recognizes the documents and diplomas received in the territories that are now under the occupation by the Russian Federation. It has to do with the professional, vocational, higher education, and secondary education. If a schoolboy lived in the temporarily occupied territories while he or she has left that place, they can resume their education or receive specific and relevant documents. As for the vocational schooling and higher education, a citizen can confirm their level of knowledge, or they might go through a shortened period of education, or their qualification can be documented with a special certificate. These documents have come into effect since March last year, and more detailed mechanism has been developed. Apart from that, the Cabinet of Ministers this year has passed a decree on the implementation of the project to work in the bodies of the Ukrainian authorities in the occupied territories. Decree number 524, It establishes a reserve of the public servants who will be working in the deoccupied territories of Ukraine. The priority categories of persons that will be eligible for such posts will be veterans of war, internally displaced persons, and a special significance is given to the internally displaced persons who come from those territories. They can serve as public servants in the future. That is to say, the government is doing a lot to make sure that the deoccupied territories grow with the effort by those people who have left those territories, for people who come from there, whose motherland, a smaller motherland it is. The Interior Ministry has set up a register of missing persons under specific circumstances. It has seen a lot of delays for a number of years until a law had been passed providing a ground for such a register. The register was called to collect all the data and information on the missing persons under specific circumstances. It means mainly hostilities. It has not been effective until this year. The Cabinet of Ministers has also passed a decree number 339 on the access to the single register of deported children or children that have been forcefully transferred to the Russian Federation. This register will gather information on the persons, including children who have been deported to the Russian Federation. Because part of the Ukrainian territory is under the Russian control, the aggressor state is also regulating these territories. I would single Federal Law number 62 on the legal status of the people in the Russian territory with the Ukrainian citizenship. That law defines that if a Ukrainian citizen has accepted the Russian Federation citizenship, that is, has accepted a Russian passport, in case it is known that for some actions this person has used a Ukrainian passport, according to the Russian law, he or she will be considered to be a Ukrainian citizen. Of course, this law does not mention any reprisals against such people, but it is clear that this will be a Ukrainian citizen abiding in the territory of the Russian Federation according to the construction of the Russian legislation. We can also single out a Russian President Decree number 77 on the specific categories of the citizens and citizens without statehood. That is to say, the citizens of the other countries, which means effectively Ukrainian citizens who are threatening the national security of the Russian Federation, can be thrown out of the Russian territory, can be deported from there, which means that in the country where there are no independent judicial system, and if people cannot be granted judicial due process, once they are deported, and they will be deported if the Russian authorities treat them as a threat. Mr. Volodymyr, let's talk about the international decisions. What our friends abroad have been doing on Crimean issue. We have seen a report by the General Secretary, an annual report covering 12 months until the 30th of June. A next resolution was passed on the status of the human rights in the Crimean Peninsula and in the city of Sebastopol. It has also included newly occupied territories, so the title has been changed. This is the first time when they mention civilian hostages, which is a problem, of course. They also mention the responsibility of the Russian Federation for the ecological situation, including the Kakhovska hydroelectric power station and the attacks against civilian infrastructure and grain infrastructure, etc. At the end of last year, the hearings were begun at the European Court of Human Rights. They are looking into the case of Ukraine versus the Russian Federation. As of now, they have recorded a fact that the Russian Federation has been effectively controlling the situation there since 27th of February. Ukraine will now have to prove that the Russian Federation is exerting a systematic administrative control over the human rights violation. That is to say that this is not a single case. This is a state policy of persecuting those who don't support the occupation of Crimea. The European Union Council has put another array of sanctions, including another people that are pertaining to the human rights violations, the officers of the FSB, prosecutors and judges. All of them participated in a number of cases. For example, 5 of them pertain to the falsifying of cases, torturing and imprisonment of Vyacheslav Yasipenko, the case of Gelamov, the Jehovah's Witnesses case, and in process. What are the decisions that we are looking for this year that will come from our international partners that we think are important and you as a human rights organization will advocate for? As for the next decisions to be passed, this year will basically be traditional. We are talking about General Assembly of the United Nations. There will be a resolution. We'll be working on that, contributing to the text of it. But I would like to add to what has been said already. One of the key declarations that have been approved at the level of the European Union, by the Council of Europe, was to set up a register of damage caused by the Russian Federation. The problem is that this register of damage only includes the damage of Ukraine as a state beginning 22nd of February, 2 years ago. This is where we started this press conference on. There are a lot of people suffering on that territory beginning 2014. We will move heaven and earth to make sure that this list is widened. This damages would not only include the period starting 2022. We mentioned the date of 27th of February 2014. Russia should be responsible for everything they've done, including all the victims and the victims of persecutions and all the damages. We'll be working on new sanctions. We have identified 98 persons who've been directly persecuting journalists. This is not all. It is important for us to cooperate with the Crimean platform. This is a major and perhaps the only coalition of international character when we are talking about the deoccupation of Crimea. In 2023, in spite of the aggression, all the levels of the Crimean platform, the experts and parliamentary group, all of them have been working on different decisions, and a number of decisions have been approved. It's important for the coming year. Unfortunately, this will mark a 10th anniversary of the occupation of Crimea. This will serve us as a point of special attention to make sure that the international community works on this, including the level of the UN human rights level. I think partners and ourselves have defined it as a primarily importance to work on the bilateral basis. What we have seen is the election in some countries, so some countries will be holding election. This is not to say that the results will be something that we'll be happy with. That's why we have to bolster our work in specific countries, not only at the United Nations or the European Union. We should be working with the parliaments and governments of particular countries. This year will be a year of political struggle, diplomatic struggle for Ukraine's cause, Crimea included. That's what my take on this is. I would also like to note that international humanitarian law has been violated by the Russian Federation on many occasions, beginning with the start of the occupation. We are talking about the forced conscription that is still going on since the beginning of the campaign. They have conducted 18 conscription campaigns. At least 45,000 residents of Crimea have been called up. People, this information, beginning with the 2022, have been made classified. We don't know specific numbers. According to our data, at least 5,000 Crimeans were conscripted. As for the people from Crimea participating in the hostilities, we know for sure that the conscripts that were born in that were conscripted in 2021 and 22. We know their practice when the conscripts are serving on the warships. This is a high probability of the fact that since Ukrainian army has destroyed a number of warships, the crews might have included the conscripts, and although these people did not participate in the hostilities, from the Russian perspective, there may be some casualties on those warships as well. The so-called partial mobilization is taking place in Crimea too. We don't know specific numbers. Number of conscripts has been classified, but at least what we know is that 480 casualties is what we know of people who have been coming from Crimea. We have identified them. They were born in Crimea or were the Ukrainian citizens who lived in the Crimean Peninsula. The militarization of the children there is taking place as well. The Russian Federation, as we see, is waging this war with the human resources. This is important for them to bring up as many future soldiers as possible. Their goal is to ensure that every 10th kid in the peninsula would be participating in the so-called Unarmia, which is younger army, the so-called movement of the first, the analogous organization to the Soviet pioneers. It's a different, it comes under a different name, but in essence it's the same. If you don't want to talk about open militarization, you can be part of this younger arm of the educational patriotic effort. Participating in the different military exercises or the mock exercises, the first aid, demining territories, hostility practice is something that the curriculum envisages. We should also note that Russian Federation is continuing to use the territory of Crimea not as a logistical center or military base, but as a direct attacks against the Ukrainian cities and civilian infrastructure. The missiles are launched from that territory, targeting land targets, and also the Iranian-made UAVs also are launched from there. We know for sure that in the territory of Crimea there were Iranian specialists teaching the Russians how to attack civilian population. Dear colleagues, if we have questions from the floor is yours. Welcome, Olga Skrypnyk at Ukrinform. My question is this. If there is information available, what number of political prisoners and people coming abducted from the southern Ukrainian territories, which share of them needs an immediate medical care, and how Ukrainian government can help them, and how can we, the generally the media, come to their help? Of course, this is an important. I will tell you the following. Our colleagues at the Human Rights Center, Zmina, they have been investigating the case. They know of about at least 21 persons from political prisoners in need of medical help. A lot of them are Crimean Tatars, including Ms. Tatarova. For example, Ahmed that I mentioned, you see, they cannot receive medicines that their relatives are trying to get to them. Apart from the fact that this is a maximum security regime penal system, a lot of political prisoners are sent to these so-called containment cells. They are released from there, and the next day they are sent back to those cells. And while you are in the containment cell, you cannot receive parcels from your relatives. The medical help that should be there is not served. Medicines cannot be passed to them. Their lawyers are trying to make sure that they receive them, but as a rule, these efforts are denied or refused by the authority there. What can we do about this? These people should be released because literally they cannot, it's possible that they will not make it to the end of their sentences. Mass media must be paying a lot of attention to that. Information must be collected about them. Even if we name their names, this will be part of the help. Iryna Sedova, for example, we mounted a powerful media campaign. She was not released, but at least she has been helped in a way. What else can we do? We can write letters, especially coming from journalists, diplomats, and political activists, addressing the heads of these colonies. At our site, we update the information where you can see the list of people imprisoned and those who are responsible for this imprisonment. How can you write letters to these colonies? It's important to do this, but in the first place, we should develop a mechanism that would ensure their release. The Crimean Tatars, they are not in the list of the people to be swapped because Russians believe that these are their citizens. We know the efforts of the ombudsman, and including the 193 persons that we have already mentioned. Russia ignores these lists because they believe these are their citizens, and it's up to them to decide their fate. We should not seize the support. We should be helping them, for them not to lose connection with us, not to lose an opportunity to make sure that they receive at least a minimum level of help, or they will be transferred to some medical facility. In some cases, it did work. These people were transferred to medical facilities. It's not much better than the prisoner itself, but at least it is something that we can do at least. Dear colleagues, you have more questions. I would like to go back to the issue of national legislation. What are the plans for this year? What are the drawbacks? Where can we reinvigorate the help to those who have left Crimea, and how to make sure that we reintegrate that territory at the end of the day? Perhaps more strategic decisions is that we should have a vision of reintegration and deoccupation of these territories. This strategy has been approved by the president, but it was for the situation until 2022. You know, such a vision will not be an ideal law. It should be a very specific vision to be taken advantage of by the government and by the parliament. What we are seeing today is that people are adhering to different approaches. The most bright example is the collaboration issue. This will be a test for the deoccupied territory, because Crimea has been occupied for the longest period of time, and people were forced to accept Russian passports. What will be the response by the Ukrainian authorities? The people that are there in the occupied Kherson region, for example, they collaborated with the authorities because they were forced to, they were trying to survive. That's one thing, but Crimean people should be informed about what will be considered as the point of collaborating with the occupiers. And then there will be another question: what will we do with the Russians that have been inhabiting the Peninsula. Of course, there will be criminal persecution of those who have committed crimes. But what will be do about the people who have come to the Crimean Peninsula since the beginning of the war? The procedure should be developed and developed in advance. On more practical side of things, I think it's not something that we see that the law of the political prisoners is not working. The law is there, but not all of the help can be rendered to the war prisoners. They're paid one time, 1,000 hryvnias is foreseen. There's another procedure to pay for their legal help. If, for example, people, while staying in Russia, people have to pay for the services of their lawyers. The Ukrainian government is ready to pay for those payments. That's it. But as far as the psychological aid, other kinds of helps are concerned, is something that we are lacking, which makes me wonder. We are mentioning something as part of the president's peace plan, but we haven't done our home assignment yet. And the civil hostages is another issue. We should put them in order. We have put up a register of people missing under special circumstances, but we have a register of people who have been deprived of their freedom. This register is not working. We don't know for sure who these people are. Civilians who have been imprisoned for political reasons, for other reasons, what are the allegations there. And basically we cannot have a specific number of people who have not been missing, but those who are hostages. If we want to return them, we should know who they are. The case of reported children is a very good case. This is where the state was trying to do everything to come up with such a register. The number of children isn't full, but we know how many countries have rallied around the case, and they have set up a coalition for children. If we are as proactive in this area, in the area of political hostages, this will bring fruits too. I think we'll be active in continuing with our reforms and the openness, transparency of our parliament. I think parliament should be transparent. They should contact the people who have elected them, plus the martial law. Of course, it restricts the way we communicate with our representatives, and some of them seem to have lost connection with the reality. The openness of parliament within the framework of security concerns, for example, televised sittings and hearings of the parliament, it can be done even within the working of the martial law, because the debates in parliament is a healthy thing, because these are sensitive issues, including the state of the people and the occupation. Let me thank you very much. Thank you for this fruitful year. Unfortunately, it's been the 10th year of the occupation of Crimea, and apparently there are a lot of things to be done in the future. Hopefully, we will see the release and the occupation and liberation of our territories. I would like to thank our friends who have taken interest in this topic. We thank all the forces of defense. We are working towards the ultimate victory. Glory to Ukraine.